My friends, I come to you with a word of truth, a message that must be heard in these times. We live in a world where darkness tries to wear the face of light, where deception comes dressed as reason, and where evil demands an explanation. But I say to you today, stop explaining yourself to demons in people. Stop justifying yourself to those who do not seek truth, but only seek to twist it. When the Son of God walked this earth, he was challenged, ridiculed, questioned by those whose hearts were hardened. The Pharisees demanded signs, the scoffers mocked, and the doubters sought to entangle him in their words. But did he explain himself to them? No, he stood firm, he spoke truth. He did not negotiate with evil or waste time convincing those who had already chosen their rebellion. And so, my friends, why do you try to reason with spirits that are not of God? Why do you exhaust yourself explaining your faith, your purpose, your calling to those who have no intention of understanding? There are those who will always twist your words, distort your actions, and cast doubt upon your integrity, not because they seek wisdom, but because they are driven by a spirit of confusion, a spirit of destruction, a spirit that is not from above. The enemy wants you entangled in endless arguments, distracted by debates, exhausted by defending what needs no defense. But the word says, do not cast your pearls before swine. My friends, stop offering the sacred to those who only seek to trample it. Stop explaining yourself to those who have already decided to reject the truth. Walk in the confidence of your calling. Stand firm in what God has spoken over your life. Live in the light, speak the truth, but do not let the enemy drag you into a pit of justification. For those who have ears to hear, let them hear. And for those who reject the truth, their blindness is not your burden to bear. The time is short. The world is in chaos. There is no room for compromise, no time for pleading with darkness. Walk in boldness, speak with authority, and leave the doubters to their own devices. For the righteous have no need to explain what God has already confirmed. Not everyone who questions you is looking for the truth. Some people are not asking to understand. They are asking to argue, to distort, to manipulate. They take what is clear and twist it into confusion. They take what is good and call it evil. They take what is right and try to make it seem wrong. These are not seekers of truth, but workers of deception. And yet, so many find themselves caught in an endless cycle of explaining, defending, and justifying themselves to people who have no real interest in hearing the truth. Look at the life of Jesus. Again and again, he was confronted by those who did not come to learn, but to accuse. The religious leaders of his time questioned him, not because they wanted to know him, but because they wanted to trap him. They asked, by what authority do you do these things? They demanded, why do you eat with sinners? They accused, you cast out demons by the power of Beelzebub. Did Jesus waste time justifying himself to them? No. He spoke truth and moved forward. He did not allow their manipulations to control him. He did not feel obligated to explain himself to those who had already chosen their stance against him. And yet, how often do we fall into this trap? How often do we try to explain ourselves to people who have already made up their minds? How often do we exhaust ourselves defending what should be self-evident? When someone twists your words, do you think explaining will change their heart? When someone slanders your name, do you think reasoning with them will make them see? There are those who are not looking for clarity, but for control. They are not seeking truth, but seeking to trap you in a web of endless explanations. This is one of the enemy's greatest tactics, distraction. If he can't stop you, he will drain you. He will send people into your life whose only mission is to keep you occupied with defending yourself. Instead of moving forward in your calling, you find yourself stuck in conversations that go nowhere. Instead of doing what God has called you to do, you are busy trying to prove yourself to people who never intended to believe in you in the first place. The enemy knows that if he can keep you justifying, he can keep you from progressing. Look at how the world operates today. People will take a stand for righteousness and immediately the attacks begin. Why do you believe that? How can you say that? Who gave you the right to think this way? And so many find themselves shrinking back, caught in an endless need to explain and justify what should already be clear. But the truth does not need permission to be true. The truth does not require approval to stand firm. The truth is not a debate, it is a foundation. There are people who will take your convictions and make them look like arrogance. They will take your obedience and twist it into pride. They will take your boldness and disguise it as hate. But remember, their rejection of truth is not your responsibility. It is not your job to explain yourself to those who are determined to misunderstand you. You do not have to defend what God has already established. This is not a call to silence. It is a call to wisdom. Speak truth, but do not waste time arguing with those who refuse to hear it. Jesus spoke plainly, and those with open hearts received him. Those with hardened hearts rejected him. But he did not chase after them, pleading for them to understand. He simply moved forward. So, why do we struggle with this? Because we want to be understood. We want people to see our hearts. We want them to recognize our sincerity. But the reality is, some people are not interested in seeing clearly. Their blindness is not an accident, it is a choice. And no amount of explaining will change a heart that refuses to change. If you find yourself constantly defending who you are, what you believe, or what you stand for, ask yourself, is this a conversation that leads to truth, or is this a trap designed to wear me out? Is this person genuinely seeking understanding, or are they looking for a way to twist my words? Walk in confidence, live in truth, speak boldly, but stop justifying yourself to those who twist the truth. When Jesus walked the earth, he was met with opposition at every turn. The religious leaders, the Pharisees, the scribes, they were not his followers, nor were they seekers of truth. They were his enemies, not because he had wronged them, but because they had hardened their hearts against him. They did not come to him for wisdom, but for an opportunity to trap him. They questioned him, but not to understand. They accused him, but not with justice. And yet, he did not waste time explaining himself to them. He did not beg for their approval. He did not engage in endless debates trying to convince them of what they had already chosen to reject. Time and again, they came to him with their schemes. They asked him about paying taxes, hoping to catch him in a political snare. They asked him about the law, hoping to twist his words against him. They demanded a sign, not because they would believe, but because they wanted to discredit him. And what did Jesus do? He spoke truth and left them to wrestle with it. He did not argue. He did not defend himself. He did not argue. He did not defend himself. He did not plead with them to see what was obvious. At his trial, as he stood before the high priest and the elders, false witnesses rose against him. Lies were spoken, accusations thrown, and yet he remained silent. Even when Pilate, the Roman governor, pressed him with questions, he did not defend himself. The very Son of God, the one who could have called down legions of angels to testify on his behalf, chose instead to stand in quiet authority, because truth does not need to be explained to those who have already rejected it. His enemies were not ignorant. They were willfully blind. They had seen his miracles. They had heard his teachings. They had witnessed his power. But instead of recognizing him as the Messiah, they sought to destroy him. Not because they misunderstood him, but because they refused to submit to him. No explanation would have changed their hearts, because their hearts were not searching for truth. They were set against it. And yet, How often do people today fall into the same trap of trying to explain themselves to those who have no desire to understand? How often do they waste energy justifying their faith, their convictions, and their purpose to those who have already made up their minds? If Jesus, the very embodiment of truth, did not feel the need to explain himself to his enemies, why should his followers? There is a difference between answering sincere questions and trying to convince those who are determined to oppose you. Jesus answered those who genuinely sought understanding. He revealed truth to those whose hearts were open. But to those who came only to argue, to accuse, and to twist his words, he gave no explanations. He knew their motives. He knew their hearts. He knew that no matter what he said, they would not receive it. People who reject truth are not lacking information. They are rejecting revelation. No amount of explaining can open eyes that refuse to see. No amount of reasoning can soften a heart that has chosen to be hard. This is why Jesus remained silent before his accusers. This is why he did not plead with the Pharisees to understand him. This is why he walked away from those who refused to believe. Some battles are not meant to be fought with words. Some arguments are not meant to be won. Some people will never be convinced, no matter how much evidence they are given. Jesus understood this, and he did not waste time trying to prove himself to those who had already rejected him. His confidence was not in their approval, but in his Father's will. He did not need their validation, because he knew who he was. And this is the same confidence his followers are called to walk in. If the Son of God did not explain himself to his enemies, then his people do not need to either. They are called to stand firm in truth, to walk in boldness, and to leave the doubters to wrestle with their own disbelief. The enemy knows he cannot take away what God has placed in you, so instead he seeks to wear you down. He knows that if he can't destroy you outright, he can distract you. If he can't pull you away from your purpose, he will exhaust you with battles that don't even matter. The goal is not always to make you fall, but to make you so drained that you can no longer stand effectively. He does not need to remove you from your calling if he can keep you so entangled in unnecessary struggles that you have no strength left to fulfill it. One of the greatest tactics of the enemy is to keep you constantly explaining yourself, constantly defending yourself, constantly caught in debates that go nowhere. He will send people into your life who question your every move, not because they seek truth, but because they want to keep you occupied. He will use critics who misinterpret your actions, skeptics who doubt your sincerity, and manipulators who twist your words. And before you realize it, you've spent more time fighting off distractions than actually walking in your purpose. When Nehemiah was rebuilding the walls of Jerusalem, his enemies did not attack with swords first. They attacked with distractions. They called him down from the work, trying to lure him into discussions, trying to make him justify his actions, trying to keep him from completing what God had called him to do. But Nehemiah refused. He responded, "I am doing a great work, and I cannot come down." He recognized that the enemy's goal was not to reason with him, but to stop him. And that is the same strategy the enemy uses today. He wants you to come down from the work God has given you. He wants you so focused on defending yourself that you stop advancing. There is a weight that comes with constant defense. When you spend your energy justifying yourself to people who are determined to misunderstand you, it drains your spirit. When you argue with those who have no intention of listening, it weakens your resolve. When you try to prove yourself to those who have already made up their minds against you, it leaves you exhausted. The enemy thrives in this kind of exhaustion because a weary warrior is a vulnerable warrior. A tired believer is an ineffective believer. A distracted soldier is an easy target. This is why Jesus did not waste time explaining himself to his accusers. He did not engage in endless debates with those who had already rejected him. He spoke the truth and let them wrestle with it on their own. He knew that his energy was meant for the mission, not for defending himself against those who had no desire to believe. His time was too valuable to be wasted on distractions. He was focused on his assignment, and nothing could pull him away from it. The enemy will use people to question your motives, to challenge your calling, to accuse you falsely, all to keep you distracted. He will use situations that drain your time, relationships that sap your strength, and worries that weigh down your heart. The more you focus on these things, the less time and energy you have for what truly matters. And if he can keep you in a cycle of exhaustion, constantly explaining, constantly defending, constantly proving yourself, then you are no longer moving forward. You are just trying to survive. God did not call you to live in defense mode. He did not anoint you to waste your strength on endless explanations. He called you to move forward, to walk in purpose, to stand firm. The more you try to justify yourself, the more you give power to the distractions. But when you learn to ignore what is meant to drain you, you reclaim your strength. When you stop engaging in battles that don't matter, you have more energy for the ones that do. The enemy knows he cannot steal what God has placed inside of you, so he will try to make you so weary that you no longer have the strength to use it. His strategy has always been the same: to wear down, to confuse, to entangle. But when you recognize the trap, you can refuse to fall into it. When you see the distraction for what it is, you can rise above it. The greatest threat to the enemy is not a tired believer struggling to prove themselves. It is a focused believer who refuses to be drained. There are things in life that are too precious to be wasted. Wisdom, truth, revelation. These are treasures that should not be handed over to those who will not appreciate them. Jesus gave a clear warning when he said, "Do not cast your pearls before swine." He was not speaking about animals, but about people who have no regard for what is holy, people who trample on truth, people who mock wisdom rather than receive it. Not everyone is ready for truth. Not everyone values what is sacred. And yet so many find themselves exhausted trying to explain, trying to convince, trying to share something deep and meaningful with those who only turn around and ridicule it. It is not that truth should be hidden, but that it should be given to those who are willing to receive it. Throwing pearls in the mud does not make the mud valuable. It only buries the pearls. Jesus himself lived by this principle. He spoke in parables, revealing deep truths, but only those who had ears to hear truly understood. When his disciples asked why he didn't speak plainly to the crowds, he told them that some had been given the ability to understand, while others had hardened their hearts. He did not force revelation on those who rejected it. He did not waste time debating with those who only sought to twist his words. He gave wisdom freely to those who valued it, but he did not throw it before those who would trample it underfoot. This is where many people struggle. They want to be understood. They want others to see the truth that has changed their lives. They want to share what God has revealed to them. But when they try to do so with the wrong people, they are met with mockery, resistance, and sometimes even hostility. Instead of recognizing that they are speaking to those who have no interest in receiving, they keep trying, keep explaining, keep casting their pearls before swine, and in the end they are left drained, discouraged, and questioning whether they should have spoken at all. The enemy knows how to use this against people. He will put them in situations where they feel obligated to prove themselves, to defend their faith, to explain their convictions to those who have no intention of understanding. He will use skeptics, mockers, and manipulators to make them feel like they must keep talking, keep debating, keep proving their point. But this is a trap. The more they engage, the more their precious pearls are trampled underfoot. Look at how the world treats truth today. People who stand for righteousness are often met with ridicule. Those who speak about faith are often dismissed. Those who share wisdom are often laughed at. But this is nothing new. Throughout history, those who carried truth have been opposed by those who rejected it. The prophets were mocked. The disciples were persecuted. And Jesus himself was crucified, not because they were wrong, but because many people would rather reject the truth than receive it. There comes a time when wisdom says to walk away. not in fear, not in defeat, but in understanding that not everyone is ready. Truth should be shared, but it should not be wasted. Some hearts are hard. Some minds are closed. Some people will never appreciate what is given to them, no matter how precious it is. And that is not a failure on the part of the one who speaks. It is a choice on the part of the one who refuses to listen. This is not about giving up on people. It is about recognizing where to invest energy. Jesus told his disciples that if a town refused to receive them, they should shake the dust off their feet and move on. He did not tell them to stay and argue. He did not tell them to keep explaining themselves. He told them to go where they would be received. And the same principle applies today. There is wisdom in knowing when to speak and when to be silent. There is wisdom in knowing when to share and when to hold back. Pearls do not belong in the mud, and truth does not belong in the mouths of those who will only twist it. It is not a lack of love to withhold what is precious from those who will despise it. It is a sign of discernment. And those who learn this will walk in freedom, no longer burdened by the need to explain themselves to those who refuse to hear. There is a confidence that comes when you know who you are and whose you are. When God has called you, when He has placed His hand upon you, when He has given you a purpose. You do not have to seek the approval of man. You do not have to explain yourself to those who doubt you. And you do not have to fight every battle that comes your way. You are not called to live in fear, in hesitation, or in constant defense mode. You are called to walk in boldness, trusting that God Himself will be your defender. Boldness is not arrogance. It is the assurance that you are walking in alignment with God's will. It is knowing that when He speaks, His word stands. It is standing firm when opposition comes, refusing to back down when the enemy tries to intimidate you. Boldness does not mean you will not face resistance. In fact, it guarantees that you will. Those who walk in the truth will always be met with opposition, but that opposition does not determine the outcome. God does. The enemy wants to silence those who walk in boldness. He wants to make them second guess their calling, question their authority, and feel the need to defend themselves at every turn. He will use criticism, doubt, and even personal attacks to try to shake their confidence. But those who understand that God is their defender do not waste their energy trying to fight battles that belong to the Lord. They do not engage in endless explanations or try to win the approval of people who will never support them. They move forward, knowing that God will handle what they cannot. Jesus walked in this kind of boldness. He did not chase after the approval of men. He did not explain Himself to those who twisted His words. He did not seek to justify Himself to His accusers. He simply walked in obedience to the Father, knowing that the truth would stand on its own. Even when He was falsely accused, even when He was betrayed, even when He was taken to trial, He did not feel the need to defend Himself. He understood that God was His defender, and He entrusted Himself fully to the will of the Father. When you truly believe that God is your defender, you stop feeling the need to prove yourself. You stop being consumed with what others think. You stop living in fear of criticism. You understand that no weapon formed against you will prosper, not because you have to fight every battle yourself, but because God has already secured the victory. David understood this when he faced Goliath. He did not come with a sword, with armor, or with human strength. He came with the confidence that the Lord would fight for him. He did not hesitate. He did not shrink back, and he did not entertain the doubts of those around him. While others stood in fear, David moved forward in boldness, knowing that the battle was the Lord's. And because he trusted in God's power, he saw victory where others saw defeat. This same boldness is available to those who walk in faith today. It does not come from personal strength, but from knowing that the one who calls is faithful. It comes from believing that no accusation, no opposition, and no attack of the enemy can override what God has declared. It is the kind of boldness that allows you to move forward when others hesitate, to speak when others remain silent, and to stand firm when others compromise. But walking in boldness also requires surrender. It requires trusting that God will handle what you cannot. It means resisting the urge to fight battles that are distractions. It means letting go of the need to explain yourself, to prove yourself, or to seek validation from those who do not determine your destiny. The moment you let go of the need to defend yourself is the moment you free yourself to walk fully in God's calling. God is your defender. He sees what is done in secret. He knows every word spoken against you. He understands the battles you face, and He is more than capable of handling them. When you trust Him to be your defender, you walk in a peace that cannot be shaken. You no longer waste time on arguments that don't matter. You no longer live in fear of rejection. You no longer shrink back when opposition comes. You move forward in boldness, knowing that the one who called you will also sustain you. Those who walk in boldness and trust God as their defender do not live in anxiety about what others say. They do not fight unnecessary battles. They do not let fear hold them back. They walk with the confidence that comes from knowing that God is in control, and in the end, His purpose will always prevail.